The morning rose pale and reluctant over the auction yard, as if even the sun had second thoughts about watching what would unfold there. Frost clung to the rails and boards, whitening the rough wood like old bones. Horses stood in uneven lines, their breath lifting into the cold air in quiet clouds, each one waiting to be judged by strangers who spoke in prices and certainty. At the far end of the yard stood the mare they called Unfixable. She was smaller than most noticed at first glance, not because she lacked size, but because she had learned how to disappear. Her coat was dull with neglect, her flank marked by an old scar that pulled the skin tight when she shifted her weight. One ear bore a notch, clean and pale, a memory left behind by something sharp and careless. Yet it was her eyes that unsettled people. They were not wild. They were not empty. They watched everything, holding the world at a careful distance, as if measuring how much pain might be coming next. Men passed her stall and shook their heads. Some laughed. Some spat in the dirt. Words floated easily through the cold air. Mean, dangerous, useless. The seller spoke louder than necessary, listing failed attempts and excuses, as if volume alone could turn cruelty into truth. He said she bucked, said she refused the bit, said no one had time for a horse that fought back. No one said she might have learned that fighting was the only language people had ever taught her. Nearby stood the woman who had risen before dawn to help set the yard, though no one would remember her name by midday. She wore a faded coat mended at the elbows and boots that had known better years. Her hair was pulled back without care for fashion, only function. People looked through her more often than at her, and she had grown used to that invisibility. It made things simpler. It kept disappointment manageable. She watched the mare without moving closer. She recognized the tension in that narrow body, the way the animal's muscles stayed braced even while standing still. It was the same way she herself had learned to exist in rooms where kindness was uncertain. Ready, always, for the next blow. The thought settled in her chest quietly, without words, without demand. A man she once believed might choose or pass by, his voice carrying easily as he joked with others. He had been kind enough when it suited him, attentive when it cost nothing. Now his eyes slid over her and did not stop. When he spoke was with the careless honesty of someone who had never learned restraint. Life was hard, he said. No sense in taking on trouble you didn't need. He nodded toward the mare as if that settled the matter, as if worth were something that could be measured by ease alone. The woman did not answer. She had learned that silence often saved more than words. The auction began with the usual rhythm, voices rising and falling, numbers thrown like stones. Horses were let out and sold, some quickly, some after brief hesitation. Then it was the mare's turn. She stepped into the ring stiffly, head low, eyes wide but steady. The crowd leaned in, curiosity sharpened by the promise of failure. The bidding started higher than expected and fell just as fast. Each pause stretched longer than the last. The auctioneer tried to sound hopeful, but even he could not dress the moment in grace. A low price was called. No one answered. A lower one followed. Laughter rippled through the men near the rail, not unkind in intent, just thoughtless, the way laughter often is. That was when the quiet man raised his hand. He had arrived alone and without notice, his coat worn thin at the cuffs, his hat pulled low against the cold. He had not spoken much since dawn. He had watched the horses with patience rather than hunger, as if waiting for something to reveal itself. When his eyes had found the mare earlier, they had stayed there, not lingering in judgment but resting, steady and unafraid. His bid was modest, almost apologetic, but it was enough. The yard went still for a breath. The auctioneer repeated the number, hope flickering briefly across his face. No one challenged it. The gavel came down with a sound that felt heavier than it should have, sealing a decision few understood. The mare flinched at the noise, then stilled. Her eyes found the man who had bid, and something in her gaze shifted. Not trust, not relief, just attention. The woman felt it too, that small change in the air. She did not know why he had chosen the mare, and she did not ask. Some choices did not announce themselves. They simply existed, waiting to be lived with. As the crowd moved on, already forgetting what had not entertained them, the man stepped closer to the mare's stall. He did not reach for her. He did not speak. He only stood there, breathing the same cold air, giving her the space to decide what came next. She did not pull away. The woman watched from where she stood, her hands numb, her heart oddly awake. For the first time that morning, the yard felt less like a place where things were measured and discarded, and more like the beginning of something unfinished, something that might yet learn how to last. The mare did not want to leave the yard at first. The rope felt like a question she did not trust, and her hooves planted themselves into the dirt with quiet defiance. The man did not tug or curse or make a show of strength. He waited. The cold worked its way through his coat, the murmurs of the dispersing crowd fading into distance. But he stayed where he was. Eventually the mare shifted, then took a single step forward, as if surprised by her own decision. No one clapped. No one rushed her. That seemed to matter. The woman watched from a few paces back, carrying a crate that had grown heavier than it should have. She noticed how the man kept his body turned slightly away, giving the mare the dignity of space. She noticed how his voice stayed low when he spoke, not coaxing, not commanding, simply present. Something in her chest loosened in a way she did not fully trust yet. The ranch lay a mile beyond the town, tucked into a shallow bend of land where the wind softened and the grass held longer in summer. It was not much to look at. A small house, a leaning barn, fences patched with more hope than skill. Still, it felt quieter there, as if the land itself had learned the value of patience. The mare was led into a corral and left alone with water and hay. No saddle waited. No expectations hung in the air. The woman came the next morning not because she had been asked, but because habit had taught her that help was safest when it arrived unannounced. She found the man repairing a loose board, his movements careful rather than efficient. He nodded to her, nothing more. She nodded back. Words felt unnecessary, and neither of them seemed eager to force them. The mare stood at the far end of the corral, watching. Her ribs showed when she turned, and her tail flicked at invisible threats. The woman stayed outside the fence, resting her arms along the top rail. She spoke softly, not to the horse exactly, but to the morning itself, about the weather, about how frost always left first in the low places. The mare's ears tilted toward the sound, then forward again, as if cataloging something new. Days passed in small, careful repetitions. The man worked the land and mended what could be mended. The woman helped where she could, her hand steady, her presence unobtrusive. They shared meals without ceremony, the kind where silence felt earned rather than awkward. When they did speak, it was about practical things. Water levels, feed, repairs that could wait another week. Neither asked questions that reached too far back. The mare began to move closer to the fence when the woman arrived. Not close enough to touch, close enough to observe. Her breathing slowed, her head lifted instead of lowering. The man noticed but did not comment. He seemed to understand that naming progress too soon could frighten it away. One afternoon, as clouds gathered low and gray, the woman stepped into the corral for the first time. She did not approach directly. She moved sideways, eyes soft, hands empty. The mare stiffened, muscles tight as drawn wire. The woman stopped, waited. She had learned long ago that pushing only taught fear to sharpen itself. Minutes passed. The wind shifted. The mare exhaled, a long breath she seemed to have been holding for years. She did not retreat. She did not advance. She stayed. It felt like permission. The man watched from a fence, his face unreadable. He did not step in. He did not leave. He trusted the moment to find its own shape. When the woman finally backed away, leaving the space as she had found it, the mare followed her with her eyes until she was gone. That evening, as they stood outside the barn with the sky turning the color of old copper, the woman spoke of things she rarely allowed herself to name, of being passed over, of being useful but never chosen. She did not dress the truth in drama. She simply let it exist between them. The man listened without interruption, his attention steady. When she finished, he did not offer comfort shaped like solutions. He only said that some things took longer because they mattered more. The mare stood quietly nearby, her head lowered, one hoof resting. She looked less like a problem now, and more like a question still being answered. The woman felt a cautious warmth settle inside her, fragile but real. Nothing had been fixed. Nothing had been promised. Yet as night fell over the ranch, it was hard to ignore the sense that something important had begun, not with force or certainty, but with a simple decision to stay. The change did not announce itself. It arrived the way light does in early morning, so gradually that it could only be noticed after it had already settled in. The mare stood at the fence when the woman approached now, her ears no longer pinned by fear, but turned forward in quiet curiosity. The distance between them had narrowed, not by steps taken, but by walls lowered. One afternoon, with the sky washed pale and the air holding the promise of rain, the woman lifted a brush and let it rest in her open palm. She did not reach out. She waited. The mare shifted her weight, nostrils flaring as she tested the scent of something new. When the brush finally touched her shoulder, the mare trembled, not in resistance but in memory. The woman moved slowly, each stroke careful, as if tracing the outline of trust itself. When the mare did not pull away, the woman felt her breath catch, a quiet ache loosening in her chest. The man watched from the barn door, his presence steady but distant. He had learned when to step forward and when to stay back, a skill earned through patience rather than instruction. He noticed how the woman's shoulders softened as she worked, how her movements grew more confident with each moment the mare allowed. He noticed, too, how the mare's eye half closed, not in surrender, but in something that looked like relief. Later, they sat together on the worn steps, the brush resting between them like a shared secret. The woman spoke of a time she had trusted someone who mistook her quiet for weakness. She did not linger on the details. She did not need to. The truth sat plainly in the air, asking only to be acknowledged. The man listened, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the land stretched wide and patient. When he spoke, it was not to argue against her pain, but to name it gently, as something that did not define her worth. The first man returned not long after, drawn by rumor more than regret. He leaned against the fence with easy familiarity, his eyes sharp with assessment. He commented on the mare's improved condition, on how value could rise quickly if one knew where to look. His words circled the woman too, hinting at what might have been if circumstances were different. She heard him without flinching. The distance she felt now was not bitterness, but clarity. She wished him well and turned away, the choice simple and complete. The mare reacted to the man's presence with unease, her body tightening, her head lifting high. The woman noticed immediately. She moved between them, her hand resting lightly on the mare's neck, her voice low and steady. The tension eased. The man at the fence frowned, unsettled by something he could not name, and soon left, his interest already searching for easier ground. In the days that followed, progress unfolded in small, deliberate ways. A saddle blanket was introduced, laid gently across the mare's back, and removed before fear could take hold. The mare accepted it with only a brief shudder, her trust fragile but growing. The woman's confidence grew alongside it. She spoke more freely now, laughed when something surprised her, allowed herself moments of lightness she once believed were reserved for others. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the land in soft gold, the man held the mare's lead while the woman stood at her side. Their hands brushed briefly, then parted, neither pretending the moment had not mattered. There was no urgency in it, no claim, just recognition, quiet and mutual, like the first note of a song not yet sung aloud. The mare lowered her head and pressed it gently against the woman's chest, a weight both unexpected and welcome. The woman closed her eyes, resting her cheek against the warm curve of the mare's neck. She felt the steady beat of life beneath her skin and knew, with a certainty that did not need proof, that something once labeled unfixable had only been waiting for the right kind of care. As twilight settled and the stars began their slow emergence, the man stood beside her, close enough to share the silence without breaking it. Nothing had been claimed. Nothing had been secured. Yet in that stillness, with the mare calm and the land breathing around them, it felt as though the hardest part had already been crossed, and whatever lay ahead would ask not for strength, but for the courage to continue believing. The morning arrived without ceremony, pale and still, the kind that felt like a held breath. Dew darkened the grass, and the mare stood quietly in the corral, her head lifted, as if listening for something only she could hear. The woman approached with measured steps, the rhythm of her movement now familiar, now trusted. There was no rope in her hands, no bridle waiting nearby. Only the shared understanding that whatever happened next would happen by choice. A man from town arrived later that day, drawn by word of a horse that had changed. He circled the fence with practiced eyes, noting muscle where there had once been hollowness, calm where there had been tension. He spoke of markets and distance, of how some things were worth more once they proved they could be useful. The mare shifted uneasily at his voice, the old wariness stirring like a remembered ache. The man, who owned the land, listened without interruption. He did not argue. He did not explain. When the offer came, generous and certain, he declined it with the same steadiness he brought to every other decision. He said some things were not for sale, not because they lacked value, but because they had earned it. The visitor left confused and unsatisfied, his footsteps fading back toward a world that measured worth too quickly. The woman watched the exchange from a gate, her hands resting lightly on the worn wood. She realized then that the refusal was not only for the mare. It was an answer to every quiet fear she had carried about being temporary, about being easily replaced. The thought settled in her like warmth, unfamiliar but welcome. At dawn the next morning, the man brought out a simple saddle, its leather softened by years of careful use. He placed it on the fence and stepped back. The woman approached the mare slowly, laying a hand against her neck, feeling the steady strength beneath the skin. She lifted the saddle pad and set it in place, her movements deliberate, her breath calm. The mare stood. She did not tremble. She did not retreat. When the saddle followed, settling gently onto her back, the mare shifted once, then stilled. The woman paused, listening with her whole body. She swung herself up without hurry, her weight finding balance the way water finds its level. The mare took a step forward, then another, her stride careful but sure. There was no crowd to witness it, no voice to praise or doubt, just a quiet creak of leather and the sound of hooves moving into something new. They rode only a short distance, a slow circle of the pasture, but it felt larger than that. It felt like a boundary crossed. When the woman dismounted, her legs unsteady, her smile was small and disbelieving. She rested her forehead against the mare's neck, gratitude flowing through her without words. Later, as the sun climbed higher and the work of the day waited patiently, the man stood beside her. He spoke not of futures shaped by certainty, but of days built carefully, one after another. He said he saw her not as someone in need of saving, but as someone who had survived and learned how to stay gentle anyway. The words did not demand anything. They offered shelter. The woman answered with honesty instead of fear. She said she did not need promises that stretched too far ahead. She needed only to know that she was not a burden, not a temporary solution to loneliness. The man met her gaze and nodded, as if the truth of it had always been obvious to him. The mare grazed nearby, her movements unhurried, her presence calm. She no longer watched the world as if bracing for harm. She lifted her head when called and came willingly, not because she had been broken, but because she had been trusted. As evening settled and the land cooled, the woman stood at the fence, the mare beside her, the man close enough to share the quiet. The world beyond the ranch still rushed to label and discard, to measure worth by speed and obedience. But here in this small pocket of patience, something else had taken root. Some lives are not unfixable. They are simply waiting for someone who understands that healing is not an act of force, but of staying. And as the light faded and the stars began their slow return, it felt possible that this was not an ending at all, but the kind of beginning that does not need to hurry to prove itself.